All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first of our fall Friends Author Series. I want to thank the Friends of the Belmont Public Library for supporting tonight's program. We are here with Lauren Coe, the author of this gorgeous new cookbook, Pieometry, Modern Tart Art and Pie Design for the Art and the Palate. So, Lauren Coe is a writer, artist, baker, and founder of the popular Instagram account Loco Kitchen. The Instagram account Loco Kitchen is actually how I discovered Lauren. And when I discovered that she was coming out with this book, I was so excited. And she has been lovely being willing to do this demonstration and Q&A with us tonight. So I wanted to let everybody know that we have copies of the book at the library. You can request it there, and Belmont Books in Belmont Center has copies of the book as well. So if you need to get some inspiration as we head into the holiday season, I highly encourage you to check out this gorgeous book and get inspired. All right. So, Lauren, I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to you without any further ado, and you can show us your magic.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for having me. Again, as Corinne mentioned, I am working out of a shared kitchen studio tonight, so you might hear some background noise. We're adjacent to a cafe. I believe they're closed, but in case you hear people or industrial refrigerators running, apologies. I'm happy to repeat anything if anything gets drowned out in the noise. That being said, I'm going to do a quick demo today of my hand-sliced wavy pear tart. I believe it's called the most valuable layer in the book. And I already have this really basic, easy shortbread crust that's 3 ingredients, comes together really quickly, bakes for about 20 minutes in the oven. And then I have a coffee cardamom cream filling that I've prepared in advance. It's kind of swooped all over the shortbread crust. And then to make the design, I have a variety of pears today. It's the perfect time for this tart because pears are in peak season. And the beauty of this design is that you can choose a variety of colors. You can get one of each colored pear, or you can do all one color. It will look beautiful either way. It also works really well with apples. And I've also done this design with stone fruit in the summer. So plums, peaches, nectarines also gives really beautiful color contrast. So we're just going to jump right in, grab a pear. I will start by standing it straight up and then cutting 4 sides off. So basically I'm avoiding the core. I'm just cutting sections off of the pear. And no fancy equipment necessary for this design. I just have a sharp chef's knife and a cutting board. And now I've kind of cut my pear into 4 sections. And now I will cut each section into thin slices. So about 1 millimeter. I know that feels kind of finicky, but you just basically want it to have a little bit of structure, but not to be entirely translucent. So you want it to be able to stand, but still retain some of that flexibility. And I'm just going to go through and slice up a couple slices, a number of slices. And Corinne, feel free to jump in with questions while I'm working. Not always amazing at multitasking, but happy to kind of answer questions as I go. So I have these slices. I'll try to hold them closer to the camera. And I'm basically laying them in a line separated by about 1/2 inch. And I just kind of wing it. So maybe we'll do 5 slices in this series and just kind of stand them up. And then I'm going to place them kind of in a wavy arrangement right on the surface of the tart. For this design, I like to start in the middle and work my way to one edge and then work my way to the other edge. And again, you want the skin side up, so you want that beautiful color and all that texture to show. Actually, I'm just going to add 1 more slice here. And one way you can approach this design is to cut all your pear slices and have them available and then kind of stick them in. I like to kind of cut as I go, just to vary up the color. So I'm going to cut into my green pear here. Cut up some slices, same process. This is pretty much all the technique that you'll need. for this particular design.
How long would you say it takes on average to do a pie start to finish?
It really depends. So something like this pear tart will come together fairly quickly. Again, the crust and the filling are very simple, very easy and quick. And then just kind of slicing up these fruit slices and placing them on the surface. So I would say this one takes maybe an hour start to finish. And then some of my pie tops, the ones that are a little more complicated, like the woven ones, those will take a little bit longer, maybe up to several hours. But you know, sometimes a pie could take up to 8 hours, but really that's not all active time. So I'm not in the kitchen, you know, slaving over the countertop necessarily. It's, you know, I make the dough and then it has to rest in the fridge for a couple hours. And then once the dough has rested and I get to roll it out, I will construct the design, and then the entire pie has to chill in the fridge again for a couple hours just to make sure it's nice and cold, make sure that design is set before I bake it. And then it will take, you know, another couple hours to bake in the oven. So it can be quite a lengthy process, but not all of it is active working time. So just to get back to this design really quick, I am just cutting different colored slices of pears. I'll make sure this doesn't slide right off the plate, and just kind of nestling them in together, alternating colors. Again, you can choose one color, you can choose two colors. It's pretty much up to you. And the beauty of this design also is that even if your slices aren't super even or, you know, the same height, that actually kind of lends an extra textural element to the tart. So I actually recommend this for anybody who's looking to kind of start out with their first tart. Maybe if you're a beginner, or maybe you're a little bit nervous about pie art or tart art, this is a pretty simple one because it doesn't require any fancy equipment. It's basically just kind of slicing up fruit and placing it right on the tart surface.
How ripe are these pears? Are they kind of juicy and soft, or are they a little bit harder to get the form of them?
I recommend ripe firm or firm ripe for this, or even crunchy, just because they slice better and they retain their shape. If you find that you maybe bought some pears to make this design and they're actually kind of soft and juicy, I would recommend using those in a pie filling instead, just because they'll be much harder to deal with, much harder to slice, and they won't give you that structure on the surface of the tart that you want with these slices kind of standing up straight.
How do you recommend, this is jumping the gun, but serving it and slicing it into portions? It looks like it'd be really hard to do it so that the portions were beautiful too. Any tips?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. Thanks for joining in, by the way. I recommend, let me stick this in and show you. The key is a sharp knife, and then just kind of gently sawing through back and forth to cut through that fruit, and then you can press down through the crust. So there is a way to kind of slice through your fruit, get those pristine slices, and then kind of clean off your knife between each cut, just to make sure that extra cream kind of stays where it needs to be. And then usually I'll pop it in the fridge for 20 to 30 minutes just to make sure that cream is nice and solid. And that also helps you kind of get cleaner slices as well. And I recommend serving this tart right away just because the pear slices are fresh. If you're worried about that kind of browning, you can also construct that entire pie surface or tart surface words, and then brush a little bit of sweetened lemon water or honey water, just to kind of keep that oxidation from progressing.
So we had a couple questions come in that I think that you actually just answered in that explanation. So this one is a fresh fruit tart. This one is not baked, right? And then do you wash the fruit, or is it to keep it from going brown? Is it that kind of lemon wash that you talked about?
I usually don't kind of glaze it afterwards, because I just kind of, because it comes together so quickly, I will construct it and then serve immediately. But if you think that, or if you need to make it a couple of hours in advance of, say, your dinner party, I would recommend brushing it with a little bit of honey water or lemon water, or you can slice up all your fruit, kind of soak it in a bowl of, you know, a little bit of lemon and water, and then kind of pat dry those slices and then arrange. It's really up to you. Whatever feels easier. I'm all about less work. Wherever you can kind of save time and make some shortcuts, especially since some of these designs might take a little bit longer. However you can save time, I recommend.
What inspires you? Where do you get the inspiration for your designs?
Yeah, so the short answer is everywhere. I basically kind of soak it all up from the world around me. I have pies and tarts in my feed that are inspired by storm drains, patio furniture, bathroom tile. You know, sometimes it's just the way the sunlight hits something and casts a shadow, and that's, you know, a mental image I'll stash away for a future creative session. But anything from, you know, architecture to textiles to geometric patterns and puzzles to color bursts. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I'm often inspired by seasonal produce. So again, I'm a regular person shopping at my regular neighborhood grocery store. So often what I make is determined by what's on sale, or, you know, maybe what I have on hand. Let's say I have, you know, several pounds of apples. I'll probably try to make either an apple tart or make a pie and build something around that, pairing different flavors, pairing colors and textures and things like that. So inspired by pretty much anything and everything.
When you're actually doing your designs, is it usually kind of freehand, or do you ever do templates or any like weird kitchen tools that you use to get the exact shapes?
So I'm often asked if I sketch things out, if I always draw things out, and I don't. Usually when I'm about to make something, I kind of scroll through my inspiration boards, my Pinterest boards, where I have some photos saved, and just kind of get a general idea in my head, have a general direction that I'm heading in, and then I just go for it. I find that if my plan is a little too concrete, I end up getting frustrated because dough and fruit don't always cooperate. And I'm usually much happier if I just have, you know, a general sort of idea and then just let that particular creative session guide me. And, you know, it really depends on the design I'm constructing. If I'm doing some sort of geometric design, I do have a set of shape cutters that I will use to kind of quickly cut pristine and uniform geometric shapes. Most often, I'm just kind of using my chef's knife, or if I'm working with pie dough and the design is, you know, constructed of straight lines and strips, I will use a ruler and a pastry wheel to just kind of quickly cut up those strips. People are usually surprised to hear that I use a ruler more as a straight line guide than to measure. So yeah, there's no math involved in pretty much any of my designs except maybe aesthetically. And I'm usually just kind of winging it and going for it.
How long have you been baking? Did you begin as a kid with your family, or was it more kind of as an adult?
I like to say that I come from a family of phenomenal eaters. So we're the kind of crazy people. I talk about this in the book a little bit, where my grandmother would, you know, make this beautiful, elaborate lunch. And before we even sit down to take our first bite, we're already talking about what we're going to eat for dinner. So I have the great gift of being surrounded by food, surrounded by wonderful home cooks growing up, and just kind of grew up cooking and baking, mostly for fun and to feed myself and because I enjoyed it. And my family is Chinese, Honduran American, so not a lot of traditional apple pie. I do have, you know, those stereotypical memories of being in the kitchen with my mom and my grandmother and cooking and baking together, but no kind of classic traditional apple pie. So somehow I made it to my adult life, cooking and baking a lot of different things, but never made any pie. And then when I moved to Seattle 4 years ago, I was looking for a job. My professional background is in social work and nonprofit administration. So I was just kind of looking for a job in those industries, had some extra time on my hands, and stumbled across some really beautiful pictures of pie on Pinterest and thought, oh, realized I had never made a pie and wondered if I could do it, and just went for it, made my first plaid lettuce apple pie, and it was fine. Didn't change my life. I didn't instantly transform into a pie lady. It was simply something I just kind of added to my repertoire of things that I would make for fun on the weekends, or make to feed my friends and family. And then I think I made a couple here or there over that next year after that very first pie. And then I started my local kitchen Instagram account in August of 2017. And that was totally accidental. I really just felt like I was becoming that friend and putting way too many food photos in my personal account. I thought, my friends probably think I'm really obnoxious. I just need a separate holding place for some of these photos and this kind of documentation that I really had just for myself. And it just so happened that the first photo that I uploaded into that personal photo album was a geometric pie. And then beyond my wildest or any expectations, I got almost 600 likes on that first post. And again, as a regular person, totally blew my mind, thought it was wild. And I thought, maybe I better put this account back on private. I don't know what's happening. Are these trolls? Are these bots? And so a few days later, I thought I would test and see if that was a total fluke, and posted a picture of a tart, I believe, and also got a couple hundred likes. So I just kind of kept posting and sharing pies and tarts that I was making. And within a month, I hit 1,000 followers. And then 2 months later, an account called Design Milk reshared one of my pie photos. I got 8,000 followers in a matter of hours. And then by December, so just a couple of months after that, I hit 100,000 followers as I was just continuing to make pies at night or on the weekend, because I had an office job by then. And then things just completely blew up. So I quit my office job, and 3 years later, this is what I do full time, and now I have a pie book out. It's pretty wild. And I have finished this chart design. So you can see it came together pretty quickly. Trying to do a little close up. You can see there's a lot of movement and texture. I basically just kind of covered it to the edges. And that's pretty much it for that design.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Out of the way.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm curious about for your kind of the flavors and the fruits and all of the foods or spices that you put in, have you ever made any like really terrible flavor combinations that just would, you couldn't even eat the pie?
Yeah. So pear hibiscus was a flavor combination that I really wanted to put in my book for whatever reason. I think the color of the hibiscus, the flavor, it just seems like a unique combination. I went through so many recipe tests, so many different iterations of a pie filling that combined pear and hibiscus, and I just could not make it work. It was either too perfumey, or the texture of the pears was mealy. Pretty much none of them were edible. Yeah, none of them were edible, and I just ended up having to kind of scrap that idea. And I thought, I'll do some other recipe tests. If I run out of ideas, I'll come back to it. And if you've kind of had the chance to flip through the book, you can see that that did not make it on in the book. And maybe one day I will go back to experimenting. But yeah, that one was pretty terrible. Sticks out as, went through a lot of different trials for that, and it never panned out.
All right. One of the other questions that came in earlier was, For newbies who are working their way through the book or trying this kind of technique on their own, and if things aren't really working out, if they're not really kind of matching the picture in the book, do you have any strategies for how they could salvage it?
So, I mean, one thing I talk a lot about in the book is that I wrote it in a way for people to kind of adapt these designs and recipes as their own. So maybe a particular weave or a design isn't exactly turning out for you, or you don't like the way it looks. I suggest pivoting to something simpler or just arranging things in a different way. I guess it also depends on what kind of stage you're at with the pie making process. If you're making pie dough and you're unsure about the texture, you think maybe you overworked it a little bit or maybe added a little too much liquid, I just recommend rolling out that dough, cutting it up into either strips or shapes and baking them off as pie cookies instead of kind of going through that entire labor of making an entire pie and thinking, oh, I don't think this crust is going to work. That way you don't waste that crust, but you also get to kind of give yourself another opportunity to try again before you bake up an entire pie or invest all that time into an entire thing that ultimately, hopefully you don't have to compost. And you know, if the design or a filling uses a fruit that you can't source or you don't love or it just really isn't working out, I often talk about using what you have. So look around your kitchen, whether it's a tool that you don't have or that isn't working out, or a fruit or a vegetable that isn't working out. Find substitutes in your kitchen. Look for ways to kind of incorporate what you have on hand. I know the refrigerators have kicked on, so hopefully you can hear me, but happy to repeat anything if the sound isn't clear.
Yeah, we can hear it a little bit, but you're projecting well. It's great. If anybody has any questions that they would like to add, you can feel free to let me know, or you can just unmute yourself. You can ask it in the chat. Feel free. So one thing that I'm curious about so you have the cookbook, but do you take classes or do you teach any classes?
Pre-COVID, I was doing basically monthly in-person workshops, which I loved. And my plan post-book publishing was to ramp up my workshop schedule. But obviously, current conditions aren't conducive to in-person workshops. So I'm trying to figure out if I should pivot to virtual workshops or basically what my next steps are. So yeah, I would love to continue teaching workshops and just kind of thinking through how I can continue that now. Maybe it'll be Zoom classes, maybe it'll be private social distance classes. I just started a residency in this beautiful kitchen space, and it's with the Pastry Project here in Seattle. They're a social enterprise that provides free baking and pastry training to individuals with barriers to education and jobs in the industry. So I'm super excited to support their programming and support their services and also share the space that they're in. So it's possible that I might be partnering up with them with some of their kind of curriculum while I also continue creating and figuring out what my next steps are. So hopefully the pandemic will slow down and that one day we'll be able to resume in-person workshops. That was something that I really love doing, and I hope that in the future I will be able to continue those.
That sounds really wonderful. I hope that is something that does come together.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah. So a more technical question. We had someone ask, what do you use to thicken a fruit pie filling? Do you use flour, tapioca, something else?
Yeah, so I pretty much exclusively use tapioca starch for my fruit fillings. I find that it gels better than cornstarch, and it also gels clear. So it doesn't have that kind of cloudy look that cornstarch gives, and it also doesn't have the grittiness that flour gives. And I find that it's super reliable. I just buy it in bulk and pretty much add it to all of my fruit fillings. If you do use tapioca starch for your fruit fillings, one of the baked indicators that I talk about in my book is that when you're baking, even if your crust is golden on top, golden on the edges, make sure your filling is bubbling all the way through the center to make sure that tapioca starch is cooked through. And that's kind of when you know the juices are going to thicken up, that you won't get that gritty, floury feeling, and that everything is all cooked and ready to pull out of the oven. Oh, and I will say that tapioca balls and like instant tapioca are not a one-to-one substitution. So.
Sure. For some of our attendees who haven't been able to get their a copy of the book yet, can you talk a little bit about how you organized it? Is it by difficulty? Is it by fruit? How is it? How is the book? What went into the structure of the book?
Yeah, so it's basically a book form of my Instagram. So my Instagram account, I post, every other post is a pie and every other post is a tart. So I wanted to give equal weight to both in the book. So there are 25 tarts and 25 pies. So the first half of the book is basically tarts. The second half of the book is pies, and preceding each section is essentially a chapter of tart crust, tart shells. I think there are 10 tart shells and 12 different pie doughs. And basically I kind of reference those in the full recipes. So each full recipe calls for specific pie doughs, and then I have 50 fillings. So both tart fillings and pie fillings, and then 50 designs. And then, you know, in the beginning, I also have a pantry section where I talk about ingredients that I use. I talk about tools that I use. There's a little intro with some of my background and my story. And then also before each tart and pie section, there's a tips section. So I talk about, you know, tips for making the dough, tips for rolling out the dough, troubleshooting for baking and assembling. So hopefully there's a lot of tips and pointers for somebody who is starting out and maybe has never made a pie before. And it should also be equally useful for somebody who is, you know, has made a couple pies, is an advanced baker, and is looking to kind of maybe branch out in the design game. We like to say that I wrote the book for everyone. So professionals, home cooks like me, armchair bakers, as we like to say, and eaters alike. So there's a slice for everyone.
I love that. That's so wonderful. All right. Grania, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Do you want to add something?
Lauren, I really, really liked your book. I'm a very keen baker. And just a couple of things. I submitted a question early, but when I finally got through the book, you had answered the question that I had put forward. So, which was wonderful. It's a wonderful book. It's even just to look at it. There was a question I had for you. I had never come across carrot seasoning before. And is that only used primarily just to color the pastry, or does it actually taste like carrot? Because I hadn't. You had one of your pastries was bright orange. I was saying, oh my gosh, how did you get it like that?
Carrot powder.
Yes, the powder, the carrot powder. Is that the function just for coloring sake, or?
So one of the things that I feature in the book is colored doughs, and all of my coloring is done naturally. So I use fruit juices, fruit powders, vegetable juices, vegetable powders. And the beautiful thing about all of this is that all of these kind of supplemental color additives don't lend any additional flavor. So it makes a really beautiful art medium because you can use it on savory pies, sweet pies. You can combine a spinach dough with a blueberry dough without any sort of disastrous effect, because that sounds awful. And really, I just use them for the color. And the beauty is that when it's baked, it just tastes like a really crisp, buttery delicious pie dough. So it's this kind of fun, happy accident, I think, that we get to add these natural colorings without worrying about, additional flavor clashing.
Right. I also had a comment with regards, you don't wash your fruit. That's kind of one of the things that we learned very early on, is that you always wash your fruit in salt and water. Whether it's an Irish thing, whether, it's just a different approach to home economics and baking. But because I had looked at that and I didn't see any of the recipes where you had said to wash your fruit in salt and water or salted water before you use it, So it was me that had asked the question, do you wash your fruit?
Like to clean it, or
yeah, absolutely clean it.
Oh yeah, so I am realizing I didn't write about washing the fruit, but I do always make sure that the fruit is cleaned, even if I'm going to peel things like apples or pears. Yeah, they're always kind of scrubbed and cleaned, especially if I get a lot of my fruit from local farms and local growers, and even grocery stores, obviously. That's a good point. But yes, I always wash my fruit, even when it gets peeled.
I'm sorry to do that. It's just it's one of those things. I don't see it in recipes in American books. But
yeah, I think
you will always see it in Irish cookery books. Yeah. If you were a really new at baking and cooking and stuff, I think, a lot of times we just can't presume that people know this stuff, even though we grew up with it and we know it. It's sometimes that I like those details. I'm a details person.
Thanks, Grania. We had another question come in that I want to preface. This is a thing you do in the book and on your Instagram and wherever, that you have a lot of pie puns. And so we had someone ask, where do you get all of your pie puns? Where do you come up with your pie puns?
I actually have to work really hard on them. I think a lot of people come to my workshop, so they meet me in person and expect me to be a stand-up comedian. And it doesn't come naturally to me. So sometimes it's just hours and hours of staring at my computer, rhyming words and trying to look up idioms and sayings and song lyrics to try to find puns. But yeah, sometimes I work as hard on the puns as I do on the pie. So I appreciate when other people appreciate them as well. But I guess my husband also has a very cheesy sense of humor, so we kind of banter back and forth, and that kind of helps get the wheels spinning. But otherwise, where do dad jokes even come from? They just kind of pull from, like, I don't know, a penchant for cheesiness and just being a nerd in general.
Kind of related about the using the language and all of that. We had another question of, did you study writing or food writing in particular?
I didn't. So, one of the big ironies of this entire journey is that what I do now has nothing to do with any kind of study that I've done or any sort of professional experience that I've had in my previous life. I feel very, very lucky to be able to do this. As it's kind of like a happy confluence of baking, art, design, writing, and feeding the people I love. And then I get to do it full time. But my degree is in international studies and sociology. And as I mentioned before, I used to work as a social worker and in nonprofit administration. So this was just kind of a happy accident that I fell into thanks to the internet sending my account viral. And I feel grateful every day that this is something I get to pursue.
With your account going viral, have you met any really cool people? Hung out with any celebrity chefs or anything? Or
I've definitely gotten to meet some big names. I think early on I got to fly to New York and bake with Martha Stewart and film 2 episodes for her show. So that was pretty wild. I often get people who send me accounts of celebrities that I often don't even know, but they have millions and millions of followers, and say, hey, this person is following you. So it's pretty crazy. And I think the internet has made the world really small. So even just the degrees of separation to people has been pretty crazy. I think I've been following a lot of food blogs and lifestyle blogs since I was in college. So I often get to interact with a lot of people who have written those now or that I've become friends with. So that's pretty crazy to think that I used to kind of follow their work and invest in kind of what they produced, and now we get to be kind of peers and colleagues. Let's see, we're looking for specific names. If you like my work, Salty Seattle on Instagram, Linda Miller Nicholson. She basically does what I do, but with pasta, and her work is really fun and really beautiful. And we got to be friends through kind of both having a similar experience of, we do this for fun, and then we shared it on the internet, and people responded really well. And now we get to kind of bond over a shared craft. And often get to make art together because she's also local to Seattle. So it's pretty fun.
What do you do with the pies when they're done? Do you eat them all? Do you and your husband eat them all, or what happens to them?
Good question. So another irony of this whole journey is that I don't really have a sweet tooth, and I don't actually love eating pies all that much. So you can definitely tell that this was sort of an accident. And my husband has definitely reached oversaturation. So I essentially have an email listserv that's called the Pipeline, and it's all my friends and family and neighbors and people that I know and trust here in the city. And I basically send weekly bulletins out whenever I have a whole spread of things. So I'll probably box this up and send a quick email and say, these are the things I have on my dining table. And then people will call dibs, and I will put them out on my porch, and they'll pick them up, and it works really nicely for all of us. I get to continue creating. I don't have to worry about food waste, and my friends and family and neighbors are all happy because they get pie. And then I also, another really cool thing about this kind of journey is that I often have the opportunity to donate a lot of these pies and tarts that I make to local nonprofit fundraisers. So I've developed some really wonderful partnerships with some local organizations, and that has been one really cool way for me to kind of combine my previous experience as a social worker and combining things that I care about with what I do now. And there is one particular organization that I have worked with for the last couple of years. They have an annual live auction. So I usually donate a 6-pie pack to them. And last year we went for $5,000, which is totally insane. But just another one of those privileges that I get to, do something for fun, make something for fun, donate it to a good cause, and also be able to support some really critical and essential programming and services. So yeah, it's a really cool kind of aspect of it.
Now I wish I lived in Seattle so I could get on the pipeline. So since you said that you actually don't have much of a sweet tooth, do you wish that you had done it with another food that you actually prefer? Do you wish that you were the pasta maven, or the something else, the savory?
Nice. My partner and I joke all the time that it's probably all for the best that I didn't go viral for sourdough bread or pizza, because then we would probably eat everything I make, and it would be a serious problem. So I think in the end, it kind of works out for everyone that I don't have much of a sweet tooth, and that we are able to kind of share everything I make. Probably better for our health and our waistlines. I think there's this rogue fly buzzing around here. But also, I do have a handful of savory tarts and savory pies in the book. So anytime I make those, we do kind of keep those for ourselves. There is a caramelized onion, potato, and Irish Porter cheddar tart in the book that I'm actually not allowed to make too often in our household because it's too dangerously delicious. And we will just keep eating slice after slice after slice. So that is like a special treat that I will make once in a while. But yeah, so we keep our options open, but thankfully I didn't go viral making pizza or, grilled cheese or anything that's delicious and savory, because I think that would be a real problem for us.
What do you do when you kind of get a mental block over it? Like, how do you find new inspiration when you've kind of run out of ideas?
Yeah, I feel like that happens a lot. I think creativity feels like it's kind of a roller coaster. It ebbs and flows. Sometimes I'm really inspired and it will just rip out a dozen pies, and then a couple days will go by or a week will go by and I just really don't feel like making anything. I don't have any ideas. I think that happened to me earlier in quarantine. Just kind of hit this rut where I just really wasn't feeling it. So I tried to kind of delve into other art forms. I actually painted a giant mural on my backyard fence, just looking for a different inspiration and hoping to get those kind of creative juices flowing. And did an abstract, kind of very colorful abstract shape mural on one side, and then went back to baking, felt a little bit more invigorated, and then kind of, a month later, was not feeling it again, went back outside, painted a fruit mural, and then kind of felt a little more inspired about, abstract art and different kind of shapes and rethinking fruit in other ways. So, yeah, if I'm feeling uninspired, if I feel like I'm out of ideas, I try to kind of break out of that box and step away from the kitchen and try to create in other ways in the hopes of finding new ideas and finding new ways to find inspiration.
I love that idea of figuring out where inspiration comes from and what you're going to do next. And so you talked a little bit about your focus now is in this shared kitchen, but do you have anything else new and big on the horizon, or is it kind of, you had just had the book come out and you're working in this kitchen, or any other big projects in the pipeline?
Yeah, so I feel like the book is still pretty new. I'm still doing lots of events and fun talks and demos for that. I'm working out of this space. I would love, as I mentioned, to do workshops. That was kind of my plan for kind of this end of the year, heading into the holidays, and this being peak pie season as I see it. But unfortunately, the current climate is kind of requiring me to pivot a little bit. So things are a little bit up in the air. I'm not really sure what the next steps are, but in the meantime, I'm still kind of creating both in this space and in my home kitchen, continuing to post and share on social media, continuing to kind of share about the book. Yeah, we'll see. I'm always open to new and other opportunities. So if anything kind of comes up in the next couple weeks or months, I'm definitely open. But yeah, that's kind of what I have planned and ahead. So we'll see how things play out.
Well, I hope everything comes together well. Grania, I don't know if you can see the chat, but Grania said that the photographs were just beautiful and it would make a lovely gift, which reminds me of another question of how do you do your photographs? Do you have any particular tips? Is that another thing of food photography that you had to kind of learn on the fly as well?
Oh, this question always makes me nervous because it's a total like fake it till you make it situation. So basically all of the photos in my Instagram I take with my iPhone that I am projecting here right now. And I have a $5 black chalkboard that I got at Home Depot. And basically I lay it down on my dining bench. I open up the shutters in my kitchen window and I take the photos with my phone. I do minimal editing, mostly because I don't know how to use a lot of the editing software. And I'm just literally just making it up as I go. Obviously, we went with a professional for the book. So Ed Anderson is amazing photographer based out of Northern California. Fortunately, we took all the photos last year, so he flew out to my house 2 separate weeks, 1 week in May, 1 week in June. We basically shot out of my house and, you know, baked an obscene amount of pies in 1 week, and he did all the photographs. So all the credit of the photographs in the book go to him. It's probably my favorite part of the book. He really made my pies and tarts look extra beautiful and really infused a lot of light and color into them. But pretty much anything that you see on social media, that's me just kind of winging it with my iPhone.
I feel like we can all identify with that a little bit.
All goes to show you don't necessarily have to be a professional, and you truly never know where life will take you. So don't let, you know, lack of professional training stop you or, you know, hinder you from taking any risks, because you never know.
Yeah. All right, so we will begin to wrap it up. We'll have another couple of minutes, so I want to make sure that everybody, if you have any final questions, if you want to ask for some tips, do so now. You can ask them in the chat and I'll read them aloud for you, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself. I just want to remind everybody that we do have the copies of Pieometry at the library. I know that we've got a little bit of a wait list on it, so I'll make sure to return my copy soon so that someone else can get their hands on it.
And I will say that this feels extra special because I did spend a lot of time at my neighborhood public library writing this book after I finished all the recipe testing. So I'm fortunate to have one a couple blocks from my house. So there were a solid few months in 2019 where every morning I'd wake up, pack my backpack, walk to the library, and spend 6 to 8 hours writing this book in the library. So this is super exciting.
It's wonderful. All right, we've got a couple more questions in the chat. What kind of wash do you prefer for pie crust?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
What kind of wash do you prefer to put on pie crust?
Egg wash. I like to use a whole egg with a splash of heavy cream. I think that gives the best, like, deep golden color. I will say that I don't egg wash any pie doughs that I use colored doughs on, just because I want to preserve the integrity and the vibrancy of that color. Obviously, the color is going to fade in the oven a little bit. It's not going to be quite as bright because all the coloring I use is natural. But we do egg wash to kind of give that golden brown, that deep burnished color. So I don't egg wash when I use colored doughs. But otherwise, I prefer to use a whole egg with a splash of heavy cream. But you know, it's really all kind of personal preference. Some people just like to use egg yolk. Some people like to use egg white just for kind of a glossy, non-golden wash. Some people like to use milk or just cream. I go for the, like, deep golden burnished color, so that's what I prefer.
All right. And another question, which this one I identify with a lot because in my pie making experience, I often use a pie mix for my crust, and then I'll make the filling from scratch. So one of the questions we had was, any additional tips for bakers who fear making pie crust from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely valid. I also had that fear going into it, but basically I learned by, 1, jumping right in, and 2, practicing over and over. I think pie dough is one of those things that you learn best from, you know, manual practice, and you really start to get a feel for it once you've done it a lot of times, once you kind of repeat. So when I first started, I was also nervous. I basically picked a recipe on the internet and just kept making it, kept practicing. And eventually you do something enough, you know, start to get a feel for what the dough should look like. You bake it enough, you start to gain that kind of knowledge of what works well. And I think I also encourage people not to be deterred by failures. Obviously, I've also had lots of pie-asters, but I will say that a lot of those failures kind of taught me things about pie dough and really helped me improve the most. because then I wouldn't repeat those mistakes, or basically it gave me really good insight into how to kind of improve what I was doing. So one, don't be afraid. Jump right in, keep practicing, and use any sort of failures or mistakes to kind of grow and learn, and use those to kind of progress in your learning journey. So yeah, be confident in yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so I think we will wrap it up here. I want to thank Lauren Coe, author of this new book, Pieometry. Grab a copy, get your inspiration before we head into Thanksgiving and the holidays. And definitely check out, if you're on Instagram, definitely go check out Loco Kitchen. I'm going to stop the recording now, but I'll stick around for a few minutes if we have any final questions. But thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much for coming, and thanks for having me.